Sometimes the deepest stab in the back doesn't come from an enemy, but from those you spent years calling family. I thought I had everything, a loving wife, a loyal friend, and a home that smelled like fresh coffee and warm evenings. I was certain it would last forever. But life doesn't warn you about the fall. It lets you build your illusion quietly, and then, in a single brutal moment, it tears everything apart, leaving you standing in the ruins of what you thought was unbreakable. Every morning, like clockwork, I brought Amanda her coffee in bed. French roast, splash of oat milk, 1 sugar, just the way she liked it. No grand gestures, no Instagram-worthy breakfast spreads, just a small, consistent sign that I thought about her. She used to smile when I handed her that cup, her hair a mess, eyes still half closed. That smile felt like winning the lottery every single time. Then I'd slip on my boots, grab my keys, and swing by Steve's house to pick him up for work. Steve and I, well, we went way back. 27 years back. Sandlot baseball, camping trips, first heartbreaks, first beers stolen from his old man's garage fridge. You name it, we did it. I was the best man at his wedding, he was mine. When Steve hit a rough patch, got laid off from the plant 3 years ago, I practically begged my boss to find him a spot on our crew. Took a pay cut myself to make it happen. That's the kind of bond we had. Not something you question, not something you think could ever turn rotten. And Amanda? She always treated Steve like family too. Maybe even better than some of our real family. He was over at our house constantly. Barbecues in the backyard, football games blaring from the living room, beers sweating in our hands as the sun dipped behind the maple trees. Amanda'd make extra ribs because, in her words, Steve eats like a linebacker. She'd joke with him, laugh with him, always welcoming, always easygoing. I used to think we had it pretty good, the three of us. Simple, steady. No reason to doubt any of it. But funny how when you look back, you realize the devil doesn't come wearing horns. No, he comes smiling, holding a plate of ribs, slapping your back and calling you brother. At the time, though, I was blissfully blind. If you had asked me then, I would have told you my life was damn near perfect. Woke up every morning to my wife's sleepy smile, spent my days working alongside a man I trusted like blood, spent my weekends with my 2 favorite people under one roof, smoke from the grill curling into the summer sky. Sounds like a bad country song, doesn't it? Only, nobody tells you in those songs that sometimes, while you're flipping burgers and laughing at some dumb joke, you're the punchline and you just don't know it yet. See, I thought loyalty was a given. I thought history meant something. Steve and I had stories that stretched back almost 3 decades, memories packed tighter than the moving boxes in my attic. Amanda and I had a marriage built on 1,000 tiny moments, not just the big milestones, but the everyday stuff, the coffee, the inside jokes, the late-night grocery runs when she craved mango sorbet. I thought those things mattered. I thought they protected us. But maybe that's the problem when you trust too much. You stop looking for cracks. You don't notice when the laughs between your wife and your best friend linger a little too long. You don't catch the way their eyes meet when they think you're not paying attention. You chalk it all up to closeness, to comfort, to history. You keep handing over your mornings, your afternoons, your blind faith like they're unbreakable. And maybe that's how betrayal really works. Not all at once like a bomb going off, but slowly, drip by drip, so quietly that you don't even hear it until you're standing in the rubble wondering what the hell happened. But back then, no, I didn't know any of that. I was just Jeremy, the guy who brought his wife coffee in bed, who picked up his best friend every morning, who thought he was living the dream. Steve would hop into the truck, slap the dashboard with that stupid grin of his, and we'd take off toward the job site, 2 guys against the world. Amanda would text sometimes around noon, a heart emoji or a picture of the dog doing something ridiculous. Steve would laugh over my shoulder, saying, "You got yourself a good one, Joe." And I'd grin like a fool, feeling like the luckiest man alive. Steve would come by after work, Amanda'd toss him a beer without even asking, and we'd all sit out back, swapping stories, letting the cicadas buzz around us like a lazy soundtrack. It felt safe. It felt right. And if you're wondering whether there were warning signs, little red flags waving in the breeze, sure, maybe there were. But when you're comfortable, when you think you're invincible, you don't see red. You see tradition. You see familiarity. You see the best parts of your life, not the cracks underneath. Looking back, there were 1,000 little moments I could have caught if I wasn't so busy trusting. Like how Steve started showing up even when he wasn't invited, or how Amanda stopped complaining about it. How sometimes I'd catch them laughing a little too hard at something I didn't hear. How she started wearing that old college hoodie of his around the house, said it was just cozy, didn't think it was a big deal. And maybe it wasn't. Or maybe it was the beginning of something that would turn my life upside down. Either way, at the time, I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. I had my coffee rituals, my ride-alongs, my Saturday barbecues. I had the illusion of a good life wrapped around me like a favorite old blanket. Warm, comforting, and slowly unraveling at the seams. And I was the last damn person to notice. Steve had always been a bit of a wreck when it came to relationships, the kind of guy who'd rush headfirst into love like a bull through a glass door and then act surprised when he was standing knee-deep in shards. 3 marriages, 3 spectacular failures, each one ending with less ceremony than the last. First wife left him for a yoga instructor, second one drained his bank account and bolted, and the third simply packed up her things one afternoon while he was out buying groceries and left a note taped to the fridge saying she needed to find herself. After that, Steve didn't bring dates around much. He'd show up alone, a worn baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, a six-pack under his arm, always quick with a laugh but carrying a tiredness in his eyes that didn't match the grin. Amanda always made a point to be kind to him, asking about his work, how he was holding up, making sure he never felt like a third wheel even when it was just the 3 of us sitting around the fire pit. I admired that about her, how she looked after people, especially the broken ones like Steve. One weekend, we decided to take a trip out to Lake Martin, just me and Steve, a couple of fishing rods, and a cooler packed tighter than a Christmas ham. It wasn't anything fancy, a beat-up aluminum boat, a squeaky motor that sounded like it was coughing up its last breath, and a tackle box so old it still smelled faintly of the 90s. We spent the day drifting aimlessly across the lake, lines cast lazily over the side, sipping beer and letting the afternoon sun bleach our worries into something smaller. Steve wasn't much of a fisherman, kept losing bait, tangling his line, cursing under his breath, but that wasn't the point. Somewhere between the second and third six-pack, he leaned back in his seat, looking up at the cloudless sky, and started going on about Amanda. How lucky I was. How rare it was to find someone like her, someone who didn't just tolerate your flaws but laughed at them, someone who could whip up a barbecue feast and still look like she stepped out of a catalog. He said it with that earnest slur drunk men get, the kind that makes even their nonsense sound like scripture. I remember smiling so wide it hurt, the kind of smile you don't fake, the kind that wells up from your chest and spills out before you even realize it. I told him not to give up, that his time would come, that there was someone out there just waiting for a guy like him to stumble into her life, all rough edges and big heart. Maybe I was a little drunk myself, maybe I was just feeling generous, but I truly believed it. We packed up around sunset, the boat rattling against the dock as we loaded the gear into the truck. The air smelled like wet earth and gasoline, and everything felt simple and easy, the way it used to when we were younger and hadn't yet learned to question every little thing. By the time we pulled into my driveway, the house looked quiet, too quiet. Amanda's car was gone, and a note on the kitchen counter explained she had driven out to her parents' place a few towns over. They were getting older, needed more help around the house lately, and she always tried to pitch in when she could. I didn't think twice about it. Steve kicked off his boots and flopped onto the couch like he owned the place, cracking open another beer and grinning up at me with that mischievous glint he always got when he had a bad idea brewing. He said we ought to call a few of the old crew, get a little party going, Just like we used to back in the days when responsibilities meant nothing more than making sure your car had half a tank and you didn't show up to work hungover enough to still be spinning. At first, I laughed it off. We were both tired, half-soused, and the thought of corralling our scattered group of old friends seemed about as likely as teaching a cat to fetch. But Steve was persistent, rattling off names, trying to guilt me into it. Mike, who now owned a landscaping business and could probably use a night off. Pete, who had moved 3 towns over but still came back sometimes for poker night. Even Eddie, who we hadn't seen since he started dating some girl who insisted on vegan potlucks and silent meditation retreats. Steve made it sound easy, like all we had to do was pick up the phone and the magic would come flooding back: cold beers, bad music, worse jokes, the kind of dumb joy you didn't even realize you missed until it was gone. Maybe it was the beer talking. Maybe it was the whole Amanda's absence left in the house, making the rooms feel too big, too hollow. Maybe it was just me not wanting to admit that the best parts of our youth were probably behind us. Either way, after a few minutes of arguing and a few more beers, I agreed. Steve fumbled for his phone with exaggerated clumsiness, his thick fingers stabbing at the screen as he scrolled through his contacts. I wandered into the kitchen, grabbed a couple of frozen pizzas from the freezer, our standard emergency rations, and threw them into the oven. The smell of rising dough and melting cheese soon filled the house, mixing with the tang of spilled beer and old leather from the recliner Steve had claimed. He managed to get a few guys on the line, their voices loud and scratchy through the speakerphone, full of half-drunken promises to swing by, just like old times. It was strange, hearing those familiar voices after so long, like dusting off a photo album and realizing the faces haven't changed nearly as much as you thought. We killed time waiting for them, polishing off the last of the beer, flipping through old playlists, laughing at songs we used to swear by, now sounding like the background music for a bad reality show. I didn't notice right away how often Steve glanced at the clock, or how he kept checking his phone, as if he was waiting for something else, something he wasn't telling me. When the doorbell finally rang, I got up, eager to see some familiar faces, shake off the heavy feeling that had started to settle in my chest. Steve stayed rooted on the couch, pretending to be absorbed in a video on his phone, barely glancing up as I crossed the room. I remember thinking it was odd, but I brushed it aside. The night was young, the beer was cold, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like maybe things could be good again. I reached for the door handle, smiling to myself, already hearing the laughter outside, the thud of boots on the porch. I opened the door, and in that moment, standing there with the cool night air spilling in, I realized something was very, very wrong. The door swung open and for a moment I was ready to see Mike or Pete or even Eddie with his weird new beard, but instead there were 3 young women standing there, none of whom I recognized, laughing like they had just stepped out of a summer movie. They were dressed like they had mistaken my house for a beach resort, tank tops barely hanging on, denim shorts frayed at the edges, and sunglasses still perched on their heads even though the sun had long dipped below the horizon. Before I could even process what was happening, they brushed past me, smelling like coconut lotion and cheap perfume, carrying plastic bags full of who knows what. I turned back toward Steve, who was grinning like he had just pulled off the prank of the century. I asked him what the heck was going on, why there were girls here instead of our old buddies, and he just laughed it off, waving his beer in the air and telling me it was time to live a little, to have some real fun like the good old days. I said it wasn't what we talked about, that we were supposed to call the guys, not invite half the cast of a college pool party. He just shrugged and said something about how the guys were all too busy being boring and married, and someone had to bring the energy. I stood there like a fool for a second, debating if I should call Amanda and tell her the circus that had erupted at our house, and as soon as I grabbed my phone and stepped outside to get better reception, she didn't pick up. I tried again, same result, voicemail after 2 rings. I didn't want any misunderstandings, so I sent her a text, just a short message telling her Steve had brought over some friends and it had gotten a little lively, but that I was keeping things under control. I stuffed my phone back in my pocket, convincing myself that honesty would cover me even if things looked a little off. Meanwhile, Steve had cranked up the music, some old rock station blaring out songs that used to play from our truck radios back in high school. He was already handing out beers like candy, and the girls had made themselves right at home, darting around the backyard like a bunch of colorful birds. At some point, someone found the box of floats and pool toys Amanda kept in the garage for our nieces and nephews, and within minutes the pool was a riot of laughter, neon rafts, and splashing water. The girls stripped down to swimsuits so tiny they looked more like stitching accidents than real clothing, shrieking and laughing as they jumped into the pool, chasing each other around like it was spring break and not a random Saturday night in suburbia. I perched myself on a chair by the patio table, nursing a drink, telling myself I was too old for this scene but also feeling a strange, guilty thrill at the sheer energy of it all. It was reckless and stupid, but it was the most alive the backyard had felt in years. Steve had the stereo going full blast, he was doing cannonballs into the pool, egging the girls on to do tricks off the diving board, and the whole thing spiraled into a chaotic, noisy blur. I tried Amanda again, just to feel better, but still no answer. I figured she was still with her folks, maybe her phone was dead, maybe she was sleeping already. I told myself she'd laugh about it later when I told her how Steve had turned our quiet night into a scene straight out of a bad reality show. As the night wore on, the drinks kept flowing. I stopped counting after my fourth, feeling a warm, buzzing numbness settle into my limbs. Steve kept feeding me beers like it was a contest, and the girls never seemed to run out of energy, dancing to the music, squealing every time Steve did something ridiculous like pretend to belly flop but chicken out at the last second. I eventually plopped down into one of the Adirondack chairs by the fire pit, too tired and too drunk to keep up with their games. My head lolled back, eyes half closed, music thudding through the air like a second heartbeat. That's when she appeared, like a shadow out of nowhere. One of the girls, the youngest looking one, barely old enough to be hanging around a place like mine, plopped herself right onto my lap with a giggle that was just a little too rehearsed. She smelled like vanilla and pool chlorine, and she leaned in so close I could feel the cold droplets of water still clinging to her skin. She told me I was cool, said it with that breathy, syrupy tone that made my skin crawl, and I immediately tried to push her off, telling her to get up, that it wasn't funny. But instead of listening, she wrapped her arms around my neck, laughing, and pressed her lips against my cheek in a sloppy, exaggerated kiss that left a smear of lip gloss behind. I was struggling to untangle myself from her octopus hold, shoving at her arms without being rough, still half dazed by the alcohol and the noise, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Tires crunching gravel, a door slamming harder than necessary. I froze. Even through the haze of beer and confusion, I knew instantly who it was. And when I turned my head toward the sliding glass door, Amanda was standing there, framed by the glow from the kitchen light, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open, staring at the scene unfolding in front of her like she had just stumbled into a stranger's house instead of her own. Amanda's face twisted into something I had never seen before, something raw and sharp, and before I could even stammer out a word, she spun on her heel and bolted down the driveway. I snapped out of my stunned haze and ran after her, calling her name, but she was already yelling over her shoulder, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. She screamed that I was a traitor, that she had only been gone for a few measly hours to help her parents and I couldn't even keep myself together that long, that I had turned our home into a circus the second she was out of sight. I tried to catch up, grabbing her wrist lightly to make her stop, trying to explain that I had called her, that I had texted her, that none of it was what it looked like, but it didn't matter. The words bounced right off her, like I was trying to bail out a sinking ship with a spoon. She cried that she didn't care about my excuses, that I had disrespected everything we built, that I humiliated her, that I made her feel like she didn't even matter in her own home. The whole time Steve stayed inside, music still thudding like a slow heartbeat, the girls quieting down, glancing nervously out the windows, knowing they had front row seats to a disaster. Amanda refused to listen to a single word, shaking her head, tears streaking down her face, and finally she got in her car and peeled out of the driveway like she couldn't get away from me fast enough. After that night, the house was like a ghost town. Amanda barely looked at me when she came home, if she even bothered coming home at all. Days turned into weeks, her suitcase becoming a permanent fixture near the front door. She said she had business trips, meetings in other towns, conferences she couldn't skip, deadlines that couldn't wait. I wanted to believe her because the guilt gnawed at me worse than anything I had ever felt. I replayed that night 1,000 times in my head, every little moment, every bad decision stacking on top of the next like a tower ready to collapse. I kept thinking if I had just said no to Steve, if I had stayed inside and away from the chaos, if I hadn't had those extra beers, maybe Amanda wouldn't look at me like I was a stranger now. I didn't know how to fix it, but I knew I had to try. One evening, after a miserable day where the silence in the house was heavier than a thundercloud, I decided to do something old-fashioned, something simple. I went out and bought the biggest bouquet I could find, a ridiculous, over-the-top arrangement full of roses, lilies, and whatever other flowers the woman at the counter said meant apology. I even ironed a clean shirt, something Amanda always appreciated but hadn't seen in a while. I knew she usually finished work around 8, so I parked across the street from her office building downtown, planning to surprise her, walk her to her car, hand her the flowers, tell her face to face that I was sorry and that none of what she thought had happened that night was true. I got there a little early, watching the windows glow in the darkening evening, people trickling out in ones and twos, huddling against the early fall chill. The bouquet sat on the passenger seat like a bright, ridiculous beacon of hope, and for a moment I actually believed maybe this would work, maybe we could get past it. I was just reaching for the door handle to cross the street when something made me freeze. I saw Steve. My old friend, standing right there at the entrance to Amanda's office, leaning against the brick wall like he had every right in the world to be there. He wasn't fidgeting, he wasn't checking his phone, he was just waiting. And sure enough, a few minutes later, Amanda came out, her hair pulled back, her coat buttoned tight against the wind, looking around before her eyes landed on him. My stomach turned to stone as I watched her walk straight up to Steve, no hesitation, no second guessing, and wrap her arms around him. Not a casual hug, not a friendly pat on the back, but the kind of kiss that tells you everything you didn't want to know but now can't unsee. I sat frozen behind the wheel, bouquet forgotten, heart slamming so hard against my ribs I thought it might crack them. I watched as they talked for a few moments, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then, without even glancing around, they got into his car, her sliding into the passenger seat without a hint of guilt. I stared down at my phone, the screen lighting up with a new message from Amanda, her name popping up like a cruel joke. She said she was headed to her friend's place, that they were going to have a few drinks and relax, that she might stay the night depending how much they drank. I dropped the phone into my lap like it burned. Across the street, Steve's car pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the night, taking with it the last sliver of whatever trust one had been holding on to. I sat there behind the wheel, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white, staring at the empty street where Steve's car had disappeared. Every part of me screamed to let it go, but something heavier inside pushed me forward. I followed them at a distance, headlights off, heart slamming against my ribs. I already knew where he was going. Steve's house, the same place we'd spent weekends fixing up broken fences and grilling burgers. I parked a little down the street and waited, thinking maybe, somehow, I was overreacting. I called Amanda, but the call went straight to voicemail again. I remembered the spare key I still had, tucked in my glove box for emergencies, back when Steve needed waking up after a night of bad decisions. I grabbed it and crossed the street, my legs feeling like they weighed 100 pounds each. The door clicked open quietly. I stepped inside and heard it immediately, laughter, low and easy, the kind that twisted my stomach into knots. I followed the sound to the hallway and there they were, sprawled across Steve's beat-up couch, Amanda in his lap, both of them looking as comfortable as any couple that had been doing this for years. My chest felt like it imploded. I don't even remember what I shouted, only that my voice echoed off the walls like a gunshot. Amanda and Steve jumped up, faces wide with guilt, but I didn't wait for excuses. I turned and ran out of that house, into the cold night, barely able to breathe. I don't remember the drive home. Somehow, I ended up in the driveway, headlights cutting across the garage. I sat there, staring blankly, heart racing. Half an hour later, Amanda burst through the door, breathless, makeup smudged, spewing half-truths about how it wasn't what it looked like and how I shouldn't be angry. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I told her one thing: I wanted a divorce. Calm, clear, final. I walked to the bedroom, grabbed my phone, and called the lawyer. Told him to prepare the papers. I didn't want another night tied to a woman who could kiss my best friend like it meant nothing. The divorce dragged out like a slow death. Amanda fought it, twisted stories, lied about me, claimed I had cheated first, even tried to spin that chaotic party as proof. But facts were stubborn, and the truth was louder than any lie she told. I had the calls, the texts, the witnesses. In the end, the court saw through her. I walked away with everything: the house, the truck, the savings, even the dog. Amanda walked out with nothing but the bitterness she tried to pin on me. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I drove home, parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the silence. For the first time in months, I could finally breathe.